The day before the Ides, a quiet Rome, a restless Caesar. The sun crept over the Palatine Hill, casting a golden haze across the sprawling city of Rome. It was a crisp morning in early March, 44 BCE, and Julius Caesar, dictator perpetuo, stirred in his domus on the edge of the Forum. The man who had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and reshaped the Republic was, on this particular day, destined for nothing more remarkable than a series of minor inconveniences and routine obligations. Caesar awoke to the soft clatter of his household slaves tending to their morning duties. His wife Calpurnia was already up, her voice drifting from the atrium as she instructed a servant on the precise arrangement of flowers for a dinner they would host later that week. Caesar rubbed his eyes, his thoughts sluggish. The weight of his 56 years pressed lightly on his shoulders. Not from the burdens of power, but from the nagging ache in his lower back, a souvenir from too many campaigns spent sleeping on hard ground. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his bare feet touching the cool mosaic floor. His chamber was modest for a man of his stature, adorned with simple frescoes of pastoral scenes and a single bronze bust of himself, a gift from a sycophantic senator. Caesar dressed in a plain woolen tunic, saving the purple-bordered toga for later, when he'd preside over a Senate meeting. For now, he preferred comfort over ceremony. Breakfast was a frugal affair: a crust of bread, a handful of olives, and a cup of watered wine. As he ate, his secretary, a wiry freedman named Lucius, shuffled into the room clutching a stack of wax tablets. "Good morning, Gaius Julius," Lucius said, bowing slightly. "Your schedule for today is unremarkable, I'm afraid." "Unremarkable is a blessing," Caesar muttered, though his tone carried a hint of irony. He had grown wary of eventful days, what with whispers of conspiracies and the cryptic warnings of that soothsayer who loitered near the theatre of Pompey. "What's on the list, then?" Lucius cleared his throat and read from the tablets. A meeting with the pontifices to discuss the calendar reforms, a brief audience with a delegation of merchants complaining about harbor taxes, and a Senate session to approve funding for road repairs outside Capua. "Oh, and your barber insists you need a trim before tomorrow's public appearance." Caesar sighed. The calendar reforms, his proudest administrative achievement, were proving to be a headache. The priests still grumbled about the new leap year system, claiming it disrupted their sacred rituals. "Fine," he said, waving a hand. "But tell the barber I'll see him when I'm good and ready. My hair is the least of Rome's problems." The morning passed in a blur of paperwork. Caesar sat in his study, a small room lined with scrolls and lit by a single window overlooking the Forum. He reviewed reports from his governors in Hispania and Syria, scribbling notes in the margins with a stylus. The reports were tedious. Grain yields were adequate, banditry was down, and a bridge in Gaul needed minor repairs. Nothing demanded his immediate genius, which was both a relief and a mild annoyance. He was a man built for crises, not for signing off on grain quotas. Around noon, Calpurnia appeared at the door, her dark hair neatly braided and her stola immaculate. "Gaius, you've been hunched over those tablets for hours. Come walk with me in the garden. The air will do you good." Caesar considered protesting, but thought better of it. Calpurnia had a way of making suggestions feel like commands. He followed her to the peristyle garden, a small oasis of roses, fig trees, and a trickling fountain. The air was indeed refreshing, scented with spring blooms and the faint tang of smoke from the city's countless hearths. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of gravel under their sandals. "You seem distracted," Calpurnia said, her brow furrowing. "Is it the Senate, or that fool Spurina and his omens?" Caesar chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Spurina's omens are nonsense. As for the Senate, they're like children squabbling over toys. I'm just restless, perhaps. Too much peace makes me uneasy." Calpurnia's eyes softened, but she said nothing more. They returned to the house, where a light lunch of lentils and boiled eggs awaited. The meeting with the pontifices was as dull as he'd feared. The priests, clad in ceremonial robes, droned on about lunar cycles and the proper alignment of festivals. Caesar nodded politely. his thoughts wandering to the gladiatorial games he'd planned for next month. At least those would be entertaining. The merchant delegation was no better. They crowded into his reception hall, a gaggle of sweaty, bearded men in garish tunics, each shouting over the others about the ruinous harbor taxes. Caesar listened for exactly as long as his patience allowed, about 10 minutes before raising a hand. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through their clamor like a gladius, "I'll review the tax codes. But if you think Rome's navy sails on good intentions, you're sorely mistaken." They left, grumbling but chastened. By late afternoon, Caesar donned his toga and made his way to the Senate House, a short walk across the Forum. The streets were alive with the usual chaos: vendors hawking figs and cheap wine, children darting underfoot, and a pair of philosophers arguing loudly about Stoicism. Caesar's lictors, bearing their fasces, cleared a path, but he waved them back, preferring to blend into the crowd as much as a dictator could. The Senate session was mercifully brief. The road repairs were approved with minimal debate, though one senator, Cassius naturally, made a snide remark about extravagant spending. Caesar ignored him, though he noted the man's sharp glance and the way his hand lingered near his toga's folds. Something to watch, Caesar thought, but he dismissed it. Cassius was always scheming. It was practically his profession. As dusk settled over Rome, Caesar returned home. The barber, a nervous Greek named Philo, finally got his chance. He snipped away at Caesar's thinning hair, muttering apologies every time the scissors came too close to an ear. "Philo," Caesar said, "if you cut me, I'll have you trimming hedges in Gaul." Philo laughed nervously and finished the job in record time. Dinner was simple: roasted fish, fresh bread, and a salad of bitter greens. Calpurnia joined him, and they spoke of trivial things: the weather, the health of their friend Marcus Antonius, the price of olive oil. Afterward, Caesar retired to his study once more, intending to read a scroll of Greek poetry. Instead, he found himself staring out the window, the city's torches flickering like stars against the darkening sky. He felt a strange pang, not of fear, but of anticlimax. This day, so ordinary and unremarkable, seemed almost alien to him. He was Julius Caesar after all, conqueror, reformer, living legend. Yet here he was, caught in the mundane rhythms of life, no different from any other Roman noble. For a moment, he wondered if the soothsayer's warnings held some truth, if the Ides of March, tomorrow, would bring something to shatter this quiet. But the thought passed. He yawned, set the scroll aside, and went to bed. The day had been uneventful, and that, he decided, was enough. The Ides of March. The morning of March the 15th dawned grey and heavy, the sun veiled behind a shroud of thin clouds. A chill hung in the air, unusual for the season, as if the city itself sensed the weight of what was to come. In his domus near the Forum, Julius Caesar stirred beneath the linen sheets, his sleep restless and shallow. He was awakened not by his slaves, but by the trembling hand of Calpurnia resting on his shoulder. "Gaius," she whispered, her voice tight with fear, "I dreamt again." He opened his eyes slowly, meeting her worried gaze. Her face, usually composed and elegant, was pale and drawn. "This time it was worse," she continued. "I saw your statue spouting blood, while Romans bathed their hands in it. The household gods have been knocked from their altars. You must not go to the Senate today." Caesar exhaled deeply. Calpurnia had always been prone to omens, but this morning her dread was contagious. He sat up, rubbing his temples. "Dreams, my love. Shadows of an anxious mind. I cannot be ruled by them. If I stay home for every bad omen, Rome will collapse under the weight of my absences." Before she could argue further, a knock at the door signaled the arrival of Decimus Brutus, one of his most trusted allies, or so Caesar believed. "Gaius Julius!" Decimus called cheerfully from the atrium. "The Senate waits. The hour grows late." Calpurnia's grip on Caesar's hand tightened. "At least postpone. Receive the Senate here, in your house." Caesar paused. The thought was tempting. But then pride, habit, and the weight of office steadied him. "No," he said firmly. "Today I must go." He rose, donned his toga with Lucius's assistance, and made his way to the atrium, where Decimus waited. As they stepped outside, a servant handed Caesar a scroll, a hastily written message from Artemidorus, one of his supporters. "Sire, a letter for you." Caesar glanced at it, but tucked it among his other petitions to read later. The letter, sealed and earnest, warned of the conspiracy against him. But fate is often a thing of small, missed moments. The streets of Rome were stirring, but quieter than usual. Citizens watched from doorways and market stalls as Caesar, flanked by his lictors and accompanied by several senators, made his way toward the Theatre of Pompey, where the Senate met that day. As they approached, the soothsayer Spurina appeared from the crowd. His eyes were fixed on Caesar. "The Ides of March have come," Caesar said with a wry smile. "Yes," Spurina replied softly, "but not yet gone." Caesar allowed himself a brief chuckle, dismissing the old man's warnings as superstition, though Calpurnia's pale face hovered in his mind. The Senate meeting convened in the Curia of Pompey, a grand hall filled with marble columns and shadows. Senators rose from their benches as Caesar entered, his lictors remaining outside as was customary. The chamber felt unusually full, voices unusually tense beneath their greetings. As Caesar made his way toward his gilded chair, Tullius Cimber approached, holding a petition. "Most noble Caesar," Cimber said, voice trembling, "I beg you, hear my plea to recall my exiled brother." Caesar waved a dismissive hand. "We'll speak of this later, Tullius." But Cimber stepped closer, grabbing Caesar's toga at the shoulder, a violation of decorum. Caesar's brow furrowed. "This is violence," he said sharply. Then, from behind, Publius Servilius Casca struck first, his dagger glancing off Caesar's shoulder. "Casca, you villain! What are you doing?" Caesar cried, trying to twist away. The others closed in like wolves. Blades flashed under the marble dome. Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, Trebonius, all striking. Surprise gave way to grim realization. "Et tu, brute!" Caesar's voice was hoarse, not accusing but mournful as his eyes met the face of Marcus Junius Brutus, whom he had treated as a son. Blood pooled beneath his sandals, staining the cold marble. His strength failed him, and he staggered, finally collapsing at the base of Pompey's statue, the irony unspoken but palpable. The conqueror slain beneath the likeness of his once rival. The conspirators stood above him, their daggers slick and trembling, their breathing ragged in the heavy silence that followed. Around them, the Senate chamber echoed with the ghosts of Rome's broken republic. Outside, the city stirred, unaware that everything had just changed. The aftermath. Rome reacts. The news spread through Rome like wildfire. At first, the people heard only rumors. Caesar wounded, an attack in the Senate, confusion in the Curia of Pompey. But within hours, the truth was known. Julius Caesar, dictator perpetuo, conqueror of Gaul, had been murdered by his own senators. The Forum, usually a hub of commerce and debate, became a place of murmuring fear. Merchants closed their stalls, artisans abandoned their work. Commoners huddled in anxious clusters, whispering under porticos and behind market stalls. Slaves carried gossip through the streets, their voices hushed but urgent. "Have you heard? Brutus himself struck him. And Cassius too. They say even Decimus turned on him. Impossible. Caesar is dead, the gods will punish them." Rome held its breath. In the Senate house, the conspirators lingered only moments after the killing. Some had blood on their hands, others on their tunics, none on their consciences, at least not yet. They expected cheers. They expected the Senate to hail them as liberators, defenders of the Republic. But when they stepped out into the Forum, they were met with silence. No shouts of victory. No crowds celebrating the fall of a tyrant. Only wide eyes, murmurs, and growing dread. Decimus tried to rally the senators still present. Cassius whispered strategies. Brutus, pale and hollow-eyed, spoke with trembling conviction. "We have saved the Republic. Rome shall thank us." But Rome did not. In the domus of Calpurnia, at home, Calpurnia sat frozen. She had known. She had felt it even before the first messenger arrived, breathless and pale. The soothsayer's warnings, her dreams, all ignored. Now her husband lay cold and bloodied beneath Pompey's statue. Lucius the secretary tried to comfort her. "My lady, the Senate will surely secure justice." But justice meant nothing now. Power had shifted. Fear ruled. Marcus Antonius moves. Mark Antony had not been among the conspirators. Clever and watchful, he had evaded them that morning. Now he moved swiftly. With the backing of Caesar's loyal soldiers and the plebeians who adored their fallen leader, Antony took possession of Caesar's papers, his treasury, and most critically, his will. Rome's mood shifted rapidly. What had begun as confusion turned to anger. The people remembered the games Caesar had given them, the grain he had provided, the debts he had forgiven. The man they called Father of the People had been slain not by foreign enemies, but by their own patricians. When Antony read the will publicly in the Forum, it was the final spark. The citizens gasped when they heard that Caesar had left money for every Roman and donated his gardens to the people. The crowd's murmurs became shouts, then cries, then screams. "They murdered him! Traitors! The Senate must pay!" The funeral days later, at Caesar's funeral, Rome boiled over. Antony, standing before the funeral pyre, spoke with calculated fury. His voice trembled with grief and anger as he unfolded Caesar's bloodied toga before the crowd. The stab wounds were visible to all, each puncture a mark of betrayal. "Behold the cloak of our great Caesar!" he cried. "Here is where Casca struck him. Here, where Cassius stabbed. Here!" He paused for effect. "Where even Brutus, whom Caesar loved most, drove his dagger." The people wailed. Some tore their garments, others wept openly. The funeral pyre erupted in flames, but so did the city. The mob turned on the conspirators' homes. Fires broke out across Rome. Statues of Brutus and Cassius were torn down and defiled. The Senate panicked. Law dissolved into chaos. The Republic dies. The conspirators fled or went into hiding. Brutus and Cassius would soon depart Rome entirely, assembling forces in the east for the war that now loomed. The Republic they claimed to have saved was already slipping away. For out of the ashes of Caesar's funeral rose not liberty, but empire. Octavian, Caesar's young adopted heir, would soon arrive. And with him, the final chapter of Rome's old republic would be written in blood. Thus ended the Ides of March, not with the rebirth of the Republic, but with the first breath of empire. The rise of Octavian. The Senate was paralyzed, the people restless, and the conspirators either fled or in hiding. Into this unstable world stepped an unlikely figure, a thin, pale, 18-year-old youth, Gaius Octavius. He was not, at first glance, a man destined for power. No military triumphs, no public office, no vast fortune of his own. But Octavius carried something far more powerful: Caesar's name. The heir Octavius arrived in Rome quietly, almost cautiously. He was Caesar's grandnephew, but now, by the will read aloud by Mark Antony, he was adopted posthumously as Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. The moment that will was revealed, Octavian became Caesar's legal son and sole heir. The people saw in him a living link to their beloved leader. The army, many of whom had served under Caesar, watched him with interest. But Mark Antony, already a consul and far more experienced, underestimated the young man. "Let the boy play at politics," Antony sneered to his allies. "He's no threat to me." The game begins, but Octavian was patient. While Antony tried to consolidate power and sway public opinion with fiery speeches, Octavian worked quietly behind the scenes. He courted the Senate, whispered to influential senators who feared Antony's growing ambition, and, most importantly, he recruited loyal veterans by promising to uphold Caesar's legacy. In the months that followed, Rome found itself split between Antony's populist might and Octavian's growing network of supporters. The Senate, always opportunistic, saw a useful counterweight in the young Caesar. By the end of 44 BCE, Octavian forced the Senate's hand. They granted him imperium, control of forces, and official status, all while still a teenager. An uneasy alliance. Meanwhile, in the east, Brutus and Cassius gathered legions, preparing for a civil war they knew was coming. The Republic had not been restored. It had fractured into factions. Realizing the greater threat was still Brutus and Cassius, Octavian and Antony formed an uneasy alliance, joined by Marcus Lepidus, forming the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE, a legally sanctioned dictatorship of 3 men. The alliance was ruthless. Together they launched proscriptions, political purges, against enemies and rivals. The blood of senators, nobles, and wealthy Romans filled the streets once again. Even Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, fell victim to their lists. Philippi, the final blow to the Republic. In 42 BCE, Octavian and Antony marched east to confront Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Though Antony commanded much of the military action, Octavian played his role carefully, allowing Antony to expend resources and gain reputation, but securing his own place among Caesar Dimasim Odo S loyalists. Brutus and Cassius both died by suicide after their forces were defeated. With them, the final hope of the old Republic died as well. The falling out. With the enemies of Caesar defeated, tension between Octavian and Antony grew. Their alliance was fragile, built only on necessity. When Antony fell under the influence of Cleopatra in Egypt, Octavian saw his opportunity. Octavian waged a brilliant propaganda campaign. Antony, the Roman hero, was portrayed as a traitor seduced by an Eastern queen, plotting to make Alexandria the center of a new empire. The Senate, manipulated by Octavian, declared war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. Actium, the decisive victory. In 31 BCE, at the naval battle of Actium, Octavian's forces, led by Agrippa, decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. The following year, both Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives in Egypt. With their deaths, no rivals remained. The princeps emerges. In 27 BCE, Octavian stood before the Senate. He renounced absolute power, but only in appearance. The Senate, grateful and fearful, bestowed upon him the title Augustus, the revered one. Thus was born the Roman Empire. Octavian, now Augustus, would rule as Rome's first emperor for more than 4 decades, bringing stability, peace, and a golden age known as Pax Romana. The Republic was dead, but Rome lived. From a murdered dictator to an emperor, the child of Julius Caesar had outplayed them all. Augustus, master of Rome. The year was 27 BCE. The Senate stood in applause as Octavian formally returned absolute powers to the state. But behind the ceremony, everyone knew true authority still rested with him. In gratitude, or perhaps fear, they granted him the title Augustus. From that moment, Rome was no longer a republic in practice. It had become an empire, and Augustus, careful, patient, ruthless Augustus, was its first emperor. The illusion of the Republic. Augustus understood something the assassins of Caesar had not. Romans still clung to the idea of the Republic. He did not abolish the Senate. He did not declare himself king. Instead, he kept the ancient titles alive: Princeps Senatus, First Citizen, Imperator, Pontifex Maximus. He ruled through soft power as much as hard power. The Senate passed laws, but only at his suggestion. Governors answered to him. The legions swore loyalty to him personally. It was not dictatorship. It was something far more durable. Autocracy wrapped in tradition. Restoring order. Augustus inherited a Rome that had been battered by decades of civil war, assassinations, and instability. He set to work rebuilding. Roads, temples, aqueducts, all restored or expanded. The legions were reorganized, made professional and loyal. Corruption was curbed with new moral reforms. though not without controversy. A standing treasury was established to stabilize finances. The chaotic grain supply, critical for Rome's huge population, was secured. Rome prospered. Trade flourished. The provinces, once rebellious, enjoyed stability. The Roman people, weary of war, welcomed this peace. The Pax Romana. Enemies in the shadows. But Augustus never forgot how quickly fortune could turn. He survived multiple plots against his life. Even within his family, intrigue was constant. His daughter Julia was exiled for scandalous behavior. Potential heirs like Marcellus and Agrippa died young. His stepson Tiberius, a man he only reluctantly accepted as heir, eventually succeeded him. The succession was always his greatest anxiety. He knew Rome could not afford another civil war. The cult of Caesar. While Julius Caesar had been declared a god after his death, Augustus carefully shaped his own legacy as the son of a god, Divi Filius. Temples were built. Coins bore his image. His public image was one of moderation, piety, and service, but also strength. He made sure that the people believed Rome's golden age was his gift, and his alone. The final years. As Augustus aged, he became increasingly careful. His once sickly health improved with age, but he knew his time was limited. On August 19th, 14th CE, in his villa in Nola, Augustus died at age 75, having ruled Rome for over 40 years. According to legend, his final words to the gathered witnesses were, "Have I played my part well? Then applaud as I exit." The Senate deified him. Augustus became a god, Divus Augustus. The legacy he found Rome a city of brick. He left it a city of marble. He brought peace to a fractured empire. He established institutions that would endure for centuries, and he created a blueprint for emperors who followed, both wise and tyrannical. The Republic never returned. Rome would be ruled by emperors for nearly 500 years more in the West and over 1,000 years in the East. All because of one patient, calculating man who understood power better than anyone before or after, Augustus, master of Rome.